I take special pleasure in introducing our next speaker, who's a very successful academic, who's become a professor at a very young age, and has been an inspiration to many people through his political activism. Professor Çağrı Erhan. I understand there's been some miscommunication and some mistakes in terms of our communication of logistics and his biography, and I apologize for that. And let me give a brief biography of Professor Erhan before inviting him to the panel. Çağrı Erhan was born in 1972 in Istanbul and is a politician and professor of international relations at Ankara University Faculty of Political Science. He graduated from the International Relations Department of the Faculty of Political Sciences at Ankara University and obtained his PhD at Hacettepe University in the year 2000. He is one of the founding editors of the Ankara Review of European Studies and sits on the editorial boards of International Law and Politics, Perceptions, and the Journal of American Studies in Turkey. He has cooperated with various institutions such as the Council of International Relations and the Center for Strategic Research, a Turkish governmental think tank. I take pleasure in inviting Professor Erhan to the panel. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. In fact, it's an extraordinary day in Ankara. Maybe you were all here from the morning up to evening. However, there's a storm outside in Ankara. And we are not accustomed with this kind of things, unlike Australia maybe, or US. In fact, this is the second occasion within 15 days. We suffered a hurricane in Erzurum recently. All over Turkey is now under storm. I hope rain will come immediately and we will save ourselves from this heavy wind. Before I go forward, I would like to clarify two theoretical aspects of the presentation. First, although the title is Turkey's strategic position in the Mediterranean security complex, as you all may know, throughout the history, Mediterranean, particularly the Eastern Mediterranean, the so-called Levant area, is an indispensable part of Middle East. So when I will go further in my presentation, I will try to use some important indicators of both of these quite important sub-regions of the so-called Afro-Eurasia area. These sub-regions, I mean the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. The second theoretical aspect I should mention is that the term strategic position is highly relative. No country, no region, no area in the world can be labeled as strategic without giving reference to another country or another region. So if you say Turkey is highly strategic, it means nothing. Turkey is highly strategic for some other countries' interests in the region. Therefore, I will try to make a global and regional analysis in order to explain Turkey's strategic importance, whether it is important or not. We are going to decide all together at the end of this presentation. And I will start with a global reference. The Mediterranean area plus the Middle East area, the overlapping two areas, are under can be counted as some of the most important areas for the global powers, for United States, for Russia, for the EU, and the emerging powers, emerging hegemonic powers like China and India in their security strategies and foreign policy priorities. This region is always counted as among one of the top subjects. So if we go further by country, in order to understand how important this area for these global powers, we will see more, I think. First of all, for all of these global powers, trade routes and energy resources in the region is quite important. Let's go back to the map. This area covers highly important straits, particularly Gibraltar, Turkish Straits, the Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandab, and Hormuz Strait. So for all the global powers, these straits are quite important, strategically important for their trade, plus for their access to the energy resources. For instance, alone the Hormuz Strait is used to transfer 35% of daily oil which is used in the world. Therefore, if it is closed, then the oil consumption countries will suffer from this a lot. For US, plus these two important points, for US, Israeli security and Iran's nuclear policy are also matters of concern for the area. For the EU, maybe in addition to Israeli security, immigration and protection of other borders are also important subjects when we are talking about the Mediterranean security. If we remember just 1 year ago, when the EU, one EU power, France, started the attack on Libya, Gaddafi forces, their top priority was not, as declared, to stop humanitarian human life violation or crimes against humanity in the region. But Sarkozy government solved it as a peril for mass immigration to European continent. So the stability in North African countries and the Middle Eastern area is quite important for EU in order to stop illegal immigration to the continent. So this is not a priority shared by the United States or China, but it's EU priority. For Russia, for centuries, Russia has an ambition to have some kind of control in the Eastern Mediterranean area plus the Middle East area. Particularly if you go back to Peter the Great era, they started to go to the south, putting some pressure on Ottoman Empire at that time. After the opening of Suez Canal, they tried to make some control over the canal. That's why in 1878, the British occupied Cyprus. They occupied but not annexed. They occupied in order to securitize the canal area from the threats stemming from Russia. And for China, as it is admitted everywhere, China will be the next superpower. It is inevitable, and it will happen for most probably after the second half of the 21st century. American power, whether we like it or not, is decreasing, and China is emerging. So to become a hegemonic power, the next hegemonic power, one of the areas to be controlled is, of course, the Mediterranean area, the Middle East and Mediterranean area. In addition to this global power rivalry in the region, there is also another rivalry between the regional powers. And there are 3 regional powers or countries who are willing to be regional powers, regional superpowers sometimes. They are mentioned in some of the analyses. And one of them is Turkey. But for Turkey, there are two more regional powers, Saudi Arabia and Iran. So once more, in order to understand how important is this Turkish strategic position, we should also go deep inside the Iran's and Saudi Arabia's foreign policy priorities for the region. For Iran, the most important case, the most important subject is regime sustainability. Iran is losing its power and domestic stability year by year for two reasons. First, the number of non-believers to the regime is increasing. Secondly, the supporters of the regime is facing growing conflicts. Particularly, the conflict is emerging about naming the next Wali Faqih, who will come after Ali Khamenei. Khamenei is ill. He is 74 years old, and of course, at the end, he will die. 80 years, 90 years, but nobody will live forever. And the position of Khamenei is more important than any leader's position in the world. He is not only the supreme religious leader of Iran, but he is the Wali Faqih. Wali Faqih means he is the earthly representative of the 12th Imam, who was lost in 9th century, and all Shiites waiting for him to come back as Mehdi to save the world. So this conflict is emerging within Iran, and when facing the repercussions of Arab Spring within Iran, Iran regime is opted for more harsh policies, domestic policies within Iran. Therefore, in order to increase their strategic importance, Iran, for more than a decade, particularly after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, step by step tried to build up a security wall or wall of influence, whatever you call. In many academic works, this is called as Shiite crescent. Iran tries to influence or increase its influence over the countries with Shiite majority or with Sunni majority, but where Shiites are in power, the case like Syria. So from Iran to Lebanon, in which Hezbollah is supported by Iran, Iran's diplomacy essentially is to protect itself from outer influence and increase its influence in the region. Therefore, this attempt, of course, brings Iran face to face with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi regime is also tries to sustain its regime. And as the Iranian influence increases in the region, the Shiites in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf area also creating an imminent threat for the Saudi regime. 12% of Saudi Arabia is Shiites. And there are a quite number of Shiites in Yemen, in Bahrain. Most of the population is Shiite. I'm sure all of you remember what happened when in Bahrain people gathered in the so-called Pearl Square. Qatar and Saudi Arabia sent their tanks to suppress it. And nobody talked about Arab Spring in Bahrain when Saudi Arabia intervened, because most of the Western countries evaluated the situation as a direct influence of Iran in the region. And so these steps are justified as just steps against Iranian interference in the region. And as experts, I'm sure, following the international news day by day, just a few days ago, Saudi Arabia and Iran also entered another conflict in the region. There are three important islands at the exit point of Strait of Hormuz, Big Tomb, the Small Tomb and Big Tomb, and Abu Musa. And on Friday, Iranian President Ahmadinejad visited Abu Musa and declared it will be as the next tourism center for Iran. However, these three islands are a matter of conflict between United Arab Emirates and Iran. So Dubai immediately reacted to this visit, and Saudi supported them. So there is an emerging new conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the region. It is, of course, not fighting against security, it is fighting against terrorism. So these also are the best supporters of fighting against Al-Qaeda in the region, because Al-Qaeda militants also wants to change the Saudi regime, and they want to control the Arab Spring, because on the streets of Tunisia and Cairo in Egypt and in Syria, people are demanding democracy. However, democracy is a threat for Saudi regime. How can an anti-democratic country support democracy? But on the other hand, they don't want to lose their control over these countries. Therefore, Saudi diplomacy is playing a very tough game in the region. And for Turkey, we have very important problems and so-called opportunities and threats in the region. And all these issues are smaller or bigger components of our policy-making process vis-à-vis to the Mediterranean area and the Middle Eastern area. None of them is negligible in a Turkish foreign policy structure. And all of them are quite important issues. As the other countries, Turkey, as a non-oil producer country, is highly dependent on energy resources in the region. Therefore, Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean is quite important for us. We see the area as a vast market, as Turkish economy growing, at least for 10 years now, over 5% year basis annually. So we see it as a close and important vast market for Turkish economy and trade. However, we want to protect our borders against any interference, particularly any terrorist intervention. And unfortunately, in northern Iraq, PKK is based for at least 15 years now. We have Syrian situation, more than 25,000 of immigrants past Turkish border, and Turkish government is now giving them humanitarian assistance within Turkey. We have problems with Israel. We want to protect Iraq's territorial integrity. However, it's getting more problematic. Turkey wants to prevent a regional war, which could be started by an Israeli military attack to Iran, or a clash between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the Gulf region, because Turkey has some concerns. If this bilateral conflict begins, then it will quite rapidly spread all over the area. And we are facing now a new Cyprus issue, which I will go into the details now. And we want to use our so-called growing influence in the region as an asset for Turkish accession to the EU. However, when compared to Turkish position 2 years ago, Turkish position now is no more can be used as an asset for the EU membership, but maybe can be evaluated as more problematic in many EU countries' statesmen minds. When we look to 2004 strategic assessment report written by the EU Commission, in that report and following annual progress reports, Turkish foreign policy was praised by EU Commission for its zero problems approach with the neighbors. Because in that time, Turkey has been initiated a policy to solve its all bilateral problems with all the neighbors, including Syria, Iran, and Iraq. And step by step, this created an area of peace in our southern borders. In 2010, for instance, in June 2010, Turkey concluded a free trade area agreement with Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. And this free trade area also enshrined, maybe, by a removal of visa agreement. So all the citizens of these 4 countries would travel without visas in this vast Middle Eastern free trade zone without any problems. But after the Arab Spring, now our Turkish-Syrian border is almost closed. We don't have any visas against each other, but in 2011, at the beginning of 2011, monthly number of trucks passing through the Turkish-Syrian border was 8,500 monthly. Now it is only 100. From almost 9,000, we come to 100 because of the situation in the region. And Syria border is quite important because all the Turkish export goods passing through Syria border, and it's not necessary to sell them to the Syrian market. Syrian route is used to take Turkish goods to Arabian Peninsula, and now it's closed. Turkey tried to open another border with Iraq. Unfortunately, Maliki government rejected it because Maliki is in connection with Iran and he is supporting Assad's policies and he is quite against Turkish influence in the region. So we are facing now difficult times with our southern borders, with our southern neighbors, and Turkey can no more use it as an asset for the European Union membership. This is the situation in Iraq. Iraq is already divided. We like it or not, there's a de facto Kurdish state, autonomous region, so-called autonomous region in the north, and if it declares its independence, then Turkey will feel more threat maybe. So in order to diminish the threat concern stemming from this region, Turkey tries to create friendly relations with the Kurdish groups in the northern Iraq. And finally, I would like to mention about a new Cyprus problem. Traditionally, when we are talking about Cyprus problem in Turkey, we are giving reference to Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots on the island, to 1960 Republic of Cyprus, 1974 Turkish military intervention on the island, etc., and of course peace talks under the auspices of United Nations Secretary General. They started before I born, even. So But now, the perception of Cyprus problem deeply changed in Turkey within 1 year. There is also, there is still ongoing peace negotiations between Greek and Turkish Cypriots on the island. However, in addition to this traditional problem or issue, last year, Greek Cypriots started to drill gas from an area. It is shown here as 12th area in south of the island. And they made it after concluding some bilateral treaties with the riparian states of the Eastern Mediterranean. With Egypt, with Israel, with Lebanon, they concluded agreements for demarcation of exclusive economic zone, and then they started to drill gas in the area. In addition to Cyprus, Greek Cypriot government, Israel also started the same. Israel has two very important areas for gas, natural gas, and the amount is incredible. It is written there. It is almost 122 trillion cubic feet of gas in this area. And Israel doesn't need this gas. They have a lot of sun. They will sell it, of course. And for Cyprus, they will also sell it. To whom? To Europe. And Turkey needs gas. Recently, government made a 18% increase in our gas prices. Unfortunately, we are quite dependable to Russia for gas, natural gas, and Iran, and we need our natural resources. However, this area is disputable between Turkey and Greek Cypriots, and now Israel, and this is an important emerging problem in the region. And for sure, EU is a party to the problem. In December 2011, in the EU summit declaration or conclusions, they gave support to Greek Cypriots. Openly, they said Greek Cypriot activity for gas drilling in this area is just and in conformity with the international law. Turkey should not intervene anyway into the situation. Therefore, Turkish government is searching some solutions in order to save its interest in the region. And just coming to here, I listened to the radio, our Minister of Energy. He gave in his words, he gave good news for Turkish people that Turkey will tomorrow, just tomorrow, will start gas drilling in the same area. So it means there will be more and more raising tensions in the region. One important point, or two important points. One, in September 2011, Turkey made a continental shelf demarcation treaty with Northern Cypriot government, Turkish Northern Cypriot government, which is not ratified yet in the Turkish National Assembly, Parliament, I mean. However, it is already made. And secondly, despite Greek Cypriots, Israelis, Lebanon's, and Egypt's declaration of executive economic zones in Mediterranean, exclusive economic zones in the Mediterranean, Turkey did not yet declare its EEZ in the region, because Turkey is not a party for 1922 Convention for the Sea Law. And this is also an important aspect I should mention. If we go back to the first step or first map, we see this area is having a lot of opportunities for peace. However, all these opportunities is under the shadow of very big problems which were not solved almost more than half a century, and emerging problems which can create more and more tensions in the region. And within this context, Turkey's strategic importance can be measured only by understanding whether it will act in future years with Western interests, or it will search for another direction in the region. If Turkey keeps its 60 years old, I'm talking about the Second World War, policy direction and overlaps its security priorities and foreign policy priorities with its Western allies, then Turkey's strategic position can be measured within the Western security and foreign policy priorities complex. If Turkey diverges from this, and there are some concern about it, of course, then we should make another presentation. I would like to thank once more to the organizers, and my particular thanks going to ARI movement, especially because ARI movement for many years in Turkey is organizing, co-organizing, or giving support these kind of initiatives. It is one of the most important and non-partisan and non-political, of course, civil society organization in Turkey. So I would like to thank Mr. Ural Aküzüm also for the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Erhan, for an excellent lecture, and I could not agree with you more with your statements about our partner, the ARI movement. Really, we're honored to have the chance to be working with them. Be happy to take any comments or questions from the audience for Professor Erhan. Who would like to go first? Please. Okay.
Carsten Paludan-Müller from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research. Thank you very much for this very splendid survey over the geopolitical considerations and conditions of Turkey and the region. There were two things which struck me as a sort of historian. I think it's fascinating to see the reproduction of the ancient rivalry between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire, now modern Turkey and Iran. That's one thing. The other thing which I would like to, that's a question to you. You did not mention the Caucasus, which evidently is not in the Mediterranean region, but I suppose you would not leave it entirely out of the equation. And if your fears about a major conflict sort of spreading to the region with, for instance, an Israeli attack on Iran, if we have a situation like that, it would definitely also ignite, or could easily ignite, I suppose, a major crisis or even conflict in around Nagorno-Karabakh, I suppose. So how does the South Caucasus fit into your equation? That's my question.
It is not a part of Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, but you are right. It directly, the equation in the Southern Caucasus directly influences the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, particularly when it comes to Iranian-Israeli problem, because just recently Israel signed an agreement with Azerbaijan. It is not an open agreement, it's secret as far as I understand, but as mentioned in international media, Azerbaijan allocated one of its bases for Israeli Air Force. For using for what? I don't know, but most probably in a war situation between Israel and Israel and Iran, most probably this base will be used by Israeli Air Force. And secondly, Israel, Azerbaijan bought more than $1 billion worth arms from Israel. So there is a rising Israel-Azerbaijani cooperation, security cooperation in the region, and quite understandable because there is an important conflict between Iran and Azerbaijan. Almost half of Iran's population is Azeris, and you mentioned our 500 years of rivalry with Iran. The first 400 years of this rivalry between the Turks. I mean, Ottoman Empire was ruled by Turks, Turkish dynasty of Osmanlis, and Iranian Safavis were Turks. You know, so this conflicts between Iranians and Turks or Ottomans can be named as a civil war, internal war between Turkish states. However, almost 45% of the population is Azeris, and Iran have some concern because of the Azerbaijanis' nationalist intentions over the so-called Southern Azerbaijan. And just 1 month ago, Iranian armed helicopter crossed Azerbaijani border. It violated it. It was protested harshly by Azerbaijani foreign ministry, and it's quite clear that Azerbaijanis and Iranis, they don't trust each other. Iran also gives support to Armenia, both diplomatically and other means, with respect to this Karabakh situation. So as you rightfully mentioned, we should include the situation of Azerbaijan into this conundrum in the region.
Professor, thank you very much. I'm Alper Zardan from the Community University. In the geography you were focusing on, I think you could pick up a number of relationships between different countries. But I would like you to comment on one particular relationship, and that is between Turkey and Israel. Because that's something that we haven't really explored extensively in this conference so far. Probably I will ask you to be a fortune teller in a way, but to excuse me. How do you see the future of Turkish-Israeli relationships in the near future? Especially in the context of this kind of the 1-minute crisis, and it seems to me that to some extent it is cleverly staged. You know, in reality, is it really there is a crisis, and how the relationship will be changing over the next couple of years? Thank you.
I would like to answer this in a fortune teller hat, under the fortune teller hat. It will be better and better in near future. You will see the problems will be recovered because Turkey opted. When I was talking, I finished that all the strategic position of Turkey will be defined or described, whether it will choose the way with or keep the way with the West or change it. I think Turkey opted for the first one. I mean, Turkey will move forward with the Western powers, particularly the United States in the region. If you would have asked this question 1 year ago, I had many confusions because the 6 principles of so-called new Turkish policy, new Turkish foreign policy, was not giving the open clues for keeping the strategic relations with the West. But now, I'm sure, after the Libya operation, after the situation in Syria, Turkey will choose the way or continue its strategic partnership, strategic cooperation with the Western countries. We are a NATO country. Therefore, Turkey cannot, and Israel cannot, sustain their foreign policies by in rivalry to each other. It is against the, if there is one science of strategy, Turkey cannot be in crisis both with Syria, with Iran, and Israel at the same time. It should, and it is the only country in the world, I think. We have problems with Syria and Israel and Iran and Iraq at the same time. Now, of course, this is maybe conjectural, it will change, but so there are some important indicators that this problem will be step by step will be solved. First of all, it is frozen. When you go to August last year, when the United Nations announced its report, Palm report, about the humanitarian fleet crisis in May 2010, Turkey launched 5 points measures against Israel. None of them is operable. Nobody is asking the future of, and for instance, one of them is quite important. Turkey said in these 5 points, this is a package of measures, we call it tedbir paketi, measures package. We said that Turkey will take this to International Court of Justice. But you know, if any one of us read a little bit international law, we know that any case could only be taken to the International Court of Justice after initial agreement between the parties. But there is another way. One of the United Nations organs, such as the Security Council or the General Assembly, they can take the issue to the International Court of Justice in order to take their opinion. Not a verdict, but an opinion. And Turkey said in September 2011 that we will take it to the International Court of Justice through General Assembly. Our Prime Minister made a 45-minute talk he gave a speech in United Nations Security General Assembly in September. He never mentioned the issue. So it is frozen. Another one was about the freezing of military relations. It is still frozen, but it is not suspended or terminated totally. The agreements are there. We didn't terminate the agreements. We didn't withdraw our signature from the agreements. So these are indicators that Turkey, we announced our package of measures, but we don't want to completely cut our relations with Israel. We go to Israel part. One important indicator is that Mr. Lieberman no more talks. I mean, he talks a lot, but he no more talks against Turkey, because he's one of the provocators of this raising tensions. Unfortunately, raising tensions. Now he stopped. Of course, Turkey and Israel have a lot of problems. Turkey wants compensation for those who were killed or injured during the unlawful intervention of Israeli troops to Turkish fleet. However, on the other hand, there are realities in the region, and these two countries, they need each other, particularly against the growing threat stemming from Iran in the region.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to please join me in expressing our sincere gratitude to Dr. Çağrı Erhan. Thank you very much.